Hey guys, it's Kay from KS Anonymous, and I am back today with another episode of r/MaliciousCompliance. I did exactly what my floor manager wanted me to. So, a little bit of backstory. A while back, I was in a wheelchair. My legs were so painful I wasn't able to stand on them, and I had pain attacks at night which would last for hours on end. Doctors couldn't figure out what the heck was wrong with me until I got even sicker. I started not being able to hold in food, only liquids. When I went to a specialist and did a blood test, it turned out I had a gluten intolerance or celiac disease. When I stopped eating gluten, I was able to walk within a few months. Turned out I have another disease affiliated with celiac disease called gluten neuropathy. It means that when I ingest gluten, my nerves are affected. To this day, when I eat gluten, the pain returns and I have a really hard time walking. Now, I work at a company as a help desk employee. I help people having technical issues with their internet, so to say. Due to the ongoing virus, we work at home every other week. Last week was a week I was supposed to work at the office. So I have told everyone who needed to know about my affliction. I also told them about my trouble walking when I ingested something I shouldn't have. So last week, I ate something containing gluten. I cannot for the life of me figure out what it was, but it was clear as day. The night before I had to go to work, I went to bed with a lot of pain, and I knew it would get worse the following day. I told my partner I would ask to stay home if I had a lot of trouble walking. The next day came around, and it happened like I thought it would. I was in so much pain, I needed my walking stick to get around. So around 8 a.m., I called my floor manager and told him and asked if I could work at home. He told me a lot of people wanted to work at home for the most stupid reasons and told me I should come to the office. So I did. Instead of calling in sick, I mustered up all my strength, took some heavy pain meds with me, and started my journey to the office. Now, normally it takes me about half an hour, but because I had a harder time walking than my gran, it took me more than an hour. I arrived at the office 15 minutes late and ran into the floor manager when I was taking my things out of my locker. At this point, I should tell you how I looked at that time. White as a sheet, hair in a messy bun, shaking from pain, and leaning heavily on my walking stick. The pain was so bad I was wincing and almost couldn't stand. My floor manager was floored, lol. He took one look at me and his mouth fell open wide. He muttered something about not knowing it would be this bad and talking about my other colleagues and how they asked to work at home for small things, how we had to treat everyone equally, etc. I worked a full day, colleagues watching over me, getting me everything I need, and taking awesome care of me. I heard one of them say how ashamed my floor manager was about making me come to work and how his response was everything I hoped for. Needless to say, he told me whenever this would happen again, I would have no trouble calling in to work at home. I would have called in sick, but my belief is that they had to learn the hard way or this would have happened again in the future. And it was probably not as epic as some stories on here, but I just wanted to share, make you enjoy the same pain-filled joy I had when I saw his face when he looked at me. It was the best thing ever. Thanks for reading. Oof. I know that a lot of people do have like a gluten intolerance and that can be pretty awful, but I have never heard of gluten neuropathy, I believe was what it was called. That sounds awful. I'm super sorry that you have to go through that, but I'm glad at least you guys, know what's causing it and at least you know what's happening. And I'm glad your floor manager understands now. In which I manipulate a lawyer into letting me recite a lawyer joke in open court and into the trial transcript. This is long, but I hope worth the trip. In the late 1990s, I was a teacher, and a girl in one of my classes began stalking me. We had her charged, and eventually the case came to trial. The story is long and complicated, and maybe I'll write it out someday. At any rate, I live in a small town, so her lawyer and I knew one another. He was a D, and I guess he thought I was one too, because we didn't get along very well. Our kids attended the same daycare, and our wives worked together, so it was often very tense in social situations. I spent a day on the stand being questioned by the prosecutor, then faced cross-examination. As I said, the story's complicated, but a big part of the case had to do with certain assignments the girl had done well in my classes, and her interpretation of the corrections and comments I made on them. For example, this girl had very advanced vocabulary for her age, but when she didn't really know what she was talking about, she'd throw a bunch of big words at me thinking it sounded impressive. My comment was something to the effect of, "I don't see enough of you," which her lawyer tried to claim was evidence that I was encouraging her. So he was questioning me on each and every assignment I had ever given out in the classes this girl had taken from me. She kept all the marked assignments and zeroed in on one in particular. It was a satire assignment modeled on Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, and the students were to make their own outrageous suggestion for a social problem. This girl had misunderstood what satire meant and just went for something gruesome and violent, something like cutting off the feet of skateboarders to teach them a lesson. In court, the lawyer suggested that I was encouraging her to reveal her dark, violent fantasies. I said it was a satire assignment, and she clearly didn't understand it. The rest of the exchange went something like this. L is for lawyer, M is for me. I put it to you that you were the one who suggested she write this. Holds up the essay. No, as I said, the assignment was supposed to be a satirical suggestion. That's not what she did. Come on now. When you gave the assignment out, you knew you would get some strange essays back, didn't you? No. We spent 2 classes reading and critiquing the original Modest Proposal, and we spent another class discussing satire. So you're saying, when you handed out the assignment, you didn't think they'd misunderstand? I thought they might. So you didn't say anything to head that off? Yes, I gave examples. What do you mean, examples? When we talked about satire, I gave examples of different kinds of satirical writing. Like what? Stories, plays, poems, and even jokes. Did you read all these things with them? No, the stories and plays I summarized, and I shared a couple of jokes. Do you remember any of them? Maybe one. What was the joke? I take a long pause as if recollecting. Do you know why researchers are using lawyers instead of rats for experiments? Because there are more lawyers than rats. The researchers don't get attached to them like they do the rats, and there are just some things you can't get a rat to do. The judge, prosecutor, court reporter, and several police officers watching all laughed out loud. The judge had to call a brief recess to restore order. We still see each other every now and then. I always smile and wave. Oh, that had to be just wonderful to sit through and realize you're getting roasted through a joke. Oh my god, that's amazing. I'm just glad I've never had to go to court and be like cross-examined or whatever like that, because I would not be able to handle the stupid questions. Like, because they get down to like what does that mean, and what is this, and what is that? Like, you really, like, seriously, that's not what it means. My first job was working for a locally owned grocery store. It was a pretty good first job, and most of the bosses weren't too bad. There was one I wasn't crazy about because he was a stickler and liked to micromanage. My job included stocking the shelves. We always had a routine when starting the day where we went through the aisles with a notepad, wrote down what was needed, and then we went to the back to load up a U-boat, those metal U-shaped frames, with the required products to fill the shelves. One day, a new rule was implemented. We were not allowed out on the floor without a U-boat. Clearly, the idea was to increase efficiency by taking note of what was needed while simultaneously putting product on the shelves. However, the issue was the unwavering wording that we always needed a U-boat while on the floor. As most know, there are very few situations where things work well as always and never. The time comes for my first shift with this new rule. I clock in and I'm ready to work. Wait, I need to have a U-boat if I'm out on the floor, but I don't know what I need on the floor without checking first. This seems like an issue. It would be a waste of time to load up an entire U-boat with product that I may discover is completely full on the shelves. So me, being a smart reader who doesn't enjoy following rules or norms that do not make sense, grabs an empty U-boat and drags it around the entire store with me while taking note of what products we need. Just as I am heading to the back with my U-boat, Supervisor Stiffy Stifferson walks up next to me and asks me why my U-boat is empty. If I had loaded shelves, it would have had empty boxes and plastic on it. I tell him very matter-of-factly, well, I had to see what we needed on the shelves, and the rule says I always need a U-boat with me if I'm on the floor. I'm pretty positive I saw him trying to conceal a smirk as he informed me that was not exactly what they meant by that rule. Part of me feels like you know that they would have 100% found them on the floor and been like, why don't you have a U-boat if they didn't have it though? You know what I mean? Recruiter told my dad he had to fire some people. He did. So this is a story from my dad a while ago, early 2000s. My dad worked for an engineer company, and his recruitment department had a bit too much control over who worked for him. One day he was told he had to lay off some workers as they were bringing in new people. Shady, I know. And the people they brought in were garbage all the time. So my dad and his big brain laid off his recruiting department and the cretins they recruited. That's fantastic. Keep that travel policy strict. Several years ago, I worked for a government contractor and traveled extensively. Usually it was for meetings in godforsaken places, but sometimes it was somewhere cool or to spend time on a ship, sometimes both. For one such ship ride, I was to board an aircraft carrier in Japan, sail to Guam, and get a flight from the ship to the island before flying home. If you've never been a non-essential passenger on an aircraft carrier, you don't get a departure time when you're planning your trip. You get a departure window of several days, and you only get to know for sure the day before your flight. So I knew a range of dates that I might arrive on Guam. The plan was to book a hotel for all 4 nights, and until we knew we were flying the next day, to just push the reservation back before the deadline. Once we had the date, we would move our flights home to the next day to only spend 1 night in a hotel. My boss made his reservation at a Days Inn while we discussed this plan in his office. He said it was the only hotel on our travel site that was within the per diem limit, so I should book soon. By the time I was at my desk, the last room was gone, and the only hotel available through our corporate travel site was a junior presidential suite at a pricey beach resort that ran somewhere around $1,400 per night. I looked around budget travel sites and direct booking with a few hotels, but there was a major fleet exercise happening around the island and hotels were packed. There were even rumors that they would just set up tents on unused airstrips to house all the Marines coming in. I told our travel department all of this and proposed that I book an Airbnb with the caveat that I would have to pay for all 4 nights, even if I only stayed for 1, but that it would still be $1,000 cheaper than 1 night at the only hotel available. My proposal was raised to the head of the travel department, who wrote back rather aggressively that if I booked an Airbnb, I would only be reimbursed for the night I actually stayed there, and that I would not be reimbursed at all if I booked the expensive hotel. My instructions were to call our travel office when I landed, and they would find whatever was available, that a room within the per diem rate would surely become available. Fast forward to landing in Guam. First call I made was to change to the next possible flight home, but I had missed the last one of the day, so I called the travel office. Of course, with my luck, the person who answered was new, and by new I mean she had started while I was on the ship. She looks it up and says there are no rooms available. I told her I was pretty sure there was 1 room available, and she replied, "Well, yes, but it's way over the per diem rate." I explained everything and told her to ask the head of her department that he knew the situation. After a long hold, she came back and said that I had a couple options. I could search around by myself for an Airbnb that was within per diem, see if my boss would let me stay in his room on a cot, or she could book the suite and I would be reimbursed in full, so... On my expense report, I made a special note that I had no transportation expense to get to the airport in Guam because my hotel room came with a private car. The only fallout was that they got very picky about my expense reports for a while. I was a pretty by-the-book business traveler, so it usually wasn't an issue, but one time a hotel I booked was 1 cent per night over the per diem limit, so they rejected my entire expense report. I filled out a new one. It was a terrible online system, so I couldn't just edit the old one, explaining that I would pay the excess out of pocket in line with policy. I also forwarded the rejection email to my boss, CCing the head of travel and asking which budget code I should charge for the half hour it took to rectify this 4-cent mistake. You don't need to know my hourly rate to know that it cost the company substantially more than 4 cents. He gave me his managerial budget, and funny enough, they stopped questioning my expenses after that. TLDR, I tried to save the company money on travel by getting creative, but they refused and wound up paying for a presidential suite and a beach resort. I mean, I would have done the same thing. Like, tell me that the options are one of them being see if the person over you would let them share the room with a cot, or get fully reimbursed for a presidential suite. I mean, that's awesome. And that's going to wrap it up for today's video. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and drop a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Really quickly, I would like to thank my patrons. Up on the screen, you should see my face palmers and my crazy K's. Thank you all so much for supporting me in that way. If you're interested in becoming a patron, checking out the original post from today's video, or sending me an email for possible inclusion in a future video, all of that information is in the description box, so be sure to check it out. And I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye!